Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'm a senior Indigenous consultation specialist with Atkins Realis. Today, we are continuing our series of live stream and radio topics on the Northern Roadlink project as it moves through the provincial environmental assessment and federal impact assessment processes. The topics we are covering parallel our project activities, so we hope these will help our viewers and listeners better understand the project and provide input along the way. And today I am missing my usual co host, Jennifer Ashwazage Pereira, but I have with me two very special guests. The first of which is Mr. Christopher McKay, a consultant to Indigenous communities and organizations and a member of Matagami First Nation. And our other guest is a voice you've heard before and a face you've seen occasionally. He typically works in the shadows of the control room, twisting knobs and tightening wires and solving problems of the day. And his name is Mr. Tony McGuire of They Media. So welcome, Chris. Welcome, Tony.
Hey, how you doing?
Did you give me a mister? I don't think you gave me a mister. I think
I did
Tony
give you a
got the
mister.
mister. I think.
I wasn't going to give you a
Okay.
mister, but I decided to give you a
Is
mister.
Chris not gonna
Yeah.
bring his
See,
mic
now I feel like it didn't deserve that. Now.
or camera on?
Yeah, that's it's
Oh, do you want me to
debatable
turn my?
whether you did.
But yeah, it's the live. This is the live stream, my friend.
Do we have Tony there? He's,
Oh, I see.
There's Chris.
I don't have a camera angle. I didn't know I was on the show, guys.
Oh, well,
I
welcome.
can, I
You
can
are
set it
on
up
the
pretty
show.
quick.
Yes, and there, look at Chris. Yeah, relaxing, enjoying himself on the couch there. I'm sure his loyal dog very close nearby, Big Carl.
No, he's in timeout
Oh, well, Carl hasn't been behaving, so
because he almost ruined the last radio show. I can't have him. Jumping in and cutting me off and stuff like that, right? So.
yeah, good point. Well, welcome, guys, and today we got a really interesting show, and we're going to talk about, and the way we've labeled these shows is community perspectives, and you'll see the reason why when we get into it, because we don't always focus on a single topic per se, and so what we're going to do is we're going to share some clips from conversations that Jennifer and I had late last year
You
with
can turn the
community
volume
members,
down over there.
with community members from both Martin Falls and from Webequie First Nation. And the purpose of doing these shows is to share these community views and hear community voices on topics relevant to the environmental assessment. So today we're going to play 4 clips of a conversation we had with Gordon Wabas of Webequie First Nation about various topics. But we're going to work through these clips, play the clip, and then have a bit of a discussion afterwards. And we welcome, any feedback that listeners and viewers may have. So what we'll do maybe first, Tony, if you can play, or Anders, if you can cue up clip number 1, and then we'll come back and have a discussion on that.
Where? Okay. Shnamela. Well, to be honest with you, growing up in Webequie, especially in my time period, I have never heard about the 7 teachings, and I have never heard about the ways of the traditional practice for our people. It was recently when I started to hear those types of activities resurface of our practice, and of our how we practice as Indigenous people. But there was household laws with the ways during the trapping days, and those really are respect for the animals, and they were very well. There was a distinction between what a man and a woman is related to the animals and what they can do and what they can't not do. And I always think about that because an example would be when my father brought in beaver from his trap line. When we brought it to the house, we were always told that there were certain protocols that we needed to watch out for in terms of. So one was that that it has to be placed where it cannot be stepped over, especially by a female or a woman. And I tried to understand that law when I was growing up and what it meant. So there was a lot of times too when my father didn't kill a beaver, and he knew that the law was broken. The relationship between the animal and him, the family, was broken. So there had to be a protocol and respect restored to be able to catch the beaver again, because to us during that time, the beaver was food for us. It was also a pelt that was traded in for currency. And during that time, it was a lot of money, good money to support the family. That's what I recall about those the laws.
Okay,
That's really, really interesting.
it really is, and
Fantastic.
what I wanted to do was pose the question to you guys. Growing up, were the seven teachings or were traditional practices shared with you? Maybe we'll start with Chris.
Yeah, no, that's a the base question. I think for a lot of Indigenous youth in the community, in my community, and I'll always reference back to my upbringing. We were on the land, and we were taught about respect for animals, and the law was there. Hunting certain things at a certain time of the year was very serious. You're not hunting out of season, or during during spawning. If we're netting, we're putting the females back and taking males and milking males and stuff like that to ensure that the spawn is healthy. And there's been instances where people have broken laws in the community, and they were taught. They weren't shunned or anything like that, but certainly they were taught the lesson. And so within the community itself, it's governed amongst the communities, and even more so within the family. So I can certainly relate to what Gordon is saying. Now, the seven teachings, is certainly something that in my generation, we weren't there yet. We weren't there, during my upbringing to have that seven teachings, because it just, we weren't at the recovery that we are, I think, today, as far as really, making that known across the First Nations.
Yeah.
That's a great point, Chris, that you just mentioned there, and there's a reason why Gordon said he hadn't heard of the seven teachings growing up, right? There was some very good reasons for that, weren't there?
I know.
Absolutely. Residential school being part of that as well. Sorry, Tony.
Oh, no,
Residential
no.
school being part of that as well. So go ahead, Tony, please.
Yeah, I know. In terms of us, we had my great grandmother signed the 1850 treaty, and at a time when women weren't even allowed to do stuff like that under law. So we have a long history of kind of and an odd history. We're very connected to the laws and learning about our Anishinaabe ways because we had white relatives that carried those teachings, because we'd have at the term was legally called half breeds. And so residential school took the Indians and the half breeds were left alone. So they were able to keep our knowledge alive in a very weird way that was good, but it was also terrible. And so we learned the hierarchy, and the importance of those hierarchies was in protecting food sources and protecting foodstuffs and protecting cycles. Because if you hunted out a season, if you killed something out of season, if you didn't respect the animal, you wouldn't eat and fall. Animals are cyclical. Moose move in 7-year cycles. And so you had to be in tune with all these things, which were also connected with stars. And so when I know just from my elders, they said when white men first came here, they said, oh, Indians worship everything. But it was just because you had to be connected to everything, because refrigeration didn't exist. You were literally at the behest of the seasons. And this was true in Europe too. It was refrigeration. Like everyone kind of views it like, oh, it always existed. It really didn't. And so the native person, the native would have to be in tune with all these things. And so I think it led to where he says you can't step over a beaver woman. And that has to do, I think there's a certain spiritual aspect that got added to this realistic viewpoint of cyclical food gathering and protecting those cycles. And that's where I think, we see that in a lot of human cultures where it's like probably really realistic things you did repetitively led to kind of these protected, I'm going to say mythology, but your religion, right? Like spiritism, your spirituality. And so I kind of like when he says that, like a woman wouldn't step over, because you're seeing application, easily to learn application of spiritual practice, which actually the long-term effects that is you're protecting your food sources, you're protecting your community,
Yep.
you're leading to a long-term and healthy community that would later on also bring in moral and ethical aspects.
You know what I found interesting?
If I can add to that, sorry.
Please.
Before I lose that thought, and about the maintaining culture, about sharing food, and about making sure that everyone has food in the freezer and the refrigeration. That's something that's real. And so I spoke to an anthropologist at one point, was working out with the Voices Cree, and asking one of the elders, the culture is changing so much, and they're losing a lot of their traditional practices, and so on and so forth. And he asked them, what is changing the culture? And the elder said, what's changing the culture is freezers. Now that people have freezers, they're able to, to hoard and stockpile, whale blubber and other foods, where before, at certain times of the year when people are running low on certain foods, they would go over and ask their neighbor, oh, come in, sit down, have some tea. They talk about the land, they talk about the culture, and here's a slice of blubber to go feed your family. And so once people had freezers and were able to stockpile food, they stopped going to visit their neighbors and stopped sharing and stopped talking to each other about that. And that's something that, you'd think something like a freezer can change a culture, and that's what the anthropologists explained about what the elders said about the loss of their culture and their community sense of sharing and well-being and living in that circular path.
Wow, is that ever interesting, Chris? Like the introduction of the freezer can have an impact like that. That's really interesting. The thing I found interesting from Gord's quote was, the need to, once someone had stepped over the beaver pelt and had, which had broken the rules, right? Broken the laws. the need to restore that relationship, right? That shows you how strong that relationship is and how intertwined it is, right? And so there was a protocol that had to be followed
Yeah.
to restore that relationship again. I found that really interesting.
That's kind of typical, right? A restoration or a rebalancing of the relationship is kind of a really major part of, I'd say, most indigenous cultures around the world, especially North America. And most famously the Hopi, where they're talking about the restoration of balances. Man doesn't follow the path. And I think those are the most famous. And the Anishinaabe religion, the Anishinaabe spirituality is very much based off rebalancing. If someone harms the community, you have to bring them in and restore balance through speech and through punishment. But our punishment is always based on rebalancing, getting them back in, and so it's odd that way. Some people will go, well, like a woman stepped over a beaver. Is that really a true thing? And I don't think that's the important aspect. It's the idea that it's part of a series of rules, and you learn them repetitively, and now you respect them because you learn that when you're a kid. Like you learn women, you learn because that's the power of women. Women should step over a beaver because of their the power contained within them, the ability of them to bring creation into existence. So when you're learning these things about food and everything, is reflecting on the relationship from the man to another human being, to his woman and her respect. So as a child, you're learning to respect women through not stepping over a beaver, and you're learning about cycles at
Yes.
it's all really cool. And so someone,
There's lessons to be learned from each of those
yeah,
things.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
whether you understand the lesson or not, it's certainly it exists. That's a great point, Tony.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's
less
a very
about.
good point.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
There's more to it than just the rule about stepping over the beaver pelt, right? It's part of
That's
something
correct.
bigger, to teach people about other things too, right? Having discipline and not, like Chris was talking about before, not hunting at the wrong times of year, not over harvesting, having some control, having some discipline, creating some rules around activities, right? So that's really interesting. Well, let's move on now to clip number 2, and then we'll continue the conversation.
As I was starting to develop gain more knowledge and understanding of our ways of life growing up, my mother told me some things passed on from the earlier generation. Talked about, I do recall the old lady. Her name was Eva Troutlake. She was a very old lady that me and my cousin used to play around her place. And she referred to her as she passed that knowledge to her, telling her that this is what our people used to do. And she talked about the lodge and how the lodge was passed on to us as Indigenous people as a way of healing and as a way to acknowledge the creation of all the things that we see.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So Eva Troutlake was a knowledge keeper, I guess, right? And one who held the responsibility for passing that knowledge down. Is that correct? Would you say, Tony, Chris?
We have these kind of recurring characters in Anishinaabe knowledge when we go back in history, and you kind of get in other cultures kind of a male based sages and things. Well, when we get back into older Anishinaabe traditions, it's usually an old lady, and it's spoken of. Everyone says, "Oh, the old lady should come and teach me about the lodge," because knowledge was kept by women, and men accessed different forms of knowledge. And when he refers to the lodge, I think it's referring to Meday or a different form, or just maybe based off of Meday, because the Anishinaabe had their own spiritual systems, right? So I kind of like, because I'm familiar with that story about an old lady passing down knowledge, because our women are the natural story keepers, right? And there's actually a teaching that goes back to the original story is the heartbeat of the mother, right? So the Indians will always say, and sorry, I used the old term. I grew up with the term Indian, so and this is how I was taught it as a um, it's important for an Indian mother to be happy, because that story goes into the baby. So if you're grumpy, you're gonna have a grumpy baby. And so my mom always used to tell my sister, "Don't be grumpy." And there's now some truth and science to that because of the constant dopamine and everything. So there's a scientific aspect to that. But so the very first lodge is the mother's womb, right? And so women are born with story keeping within them. I don't know if you're learned that, Chris, or familiar with that, but I think you've learned something similar.
Yeah, and you know what? I'll share again, going back to my experience growing up in Matagami.
Yeah.
So when you're learning skills and knowledge from male or females, right? So here's a good example that we had this. He was an elder, and you'd always make the kids slingshots. So you'd have his elastics and his mishquagan, and so the day before you'd go and we'd go find a proper birch V, all right, cut it up, put it in the water overnight. Next day you'd whittle it and get it done. Then he'd help you make it, and then all right. So we have 3 or 4 kids, we're all excited, and they're teaching us how to hunt. So we're hunting itchides, which are these small little yellow birds, the size of a tangerine. Right. And then so they'd fly in flocks, and then always an open field. So we'd go out, and the kids, we're running, finding the flock, and then we'd go up with our slingshots and we'd shoot these little tiny birds. Right. And then we'd go collect our birds, you have a little bag, and, follow the flock again. And, then when we're done, we go to Sugar Dan's house. And she was our female elder at the time, like she was, the matriarch kind of thing. And we go to her place, and then we'd sit there, and then she'd show us how to pluck and pull out all the little breasts and so on. And so here's something that both male and female are teaching the kids in the same practice, right? The same event, and you're getting to learn from both male and female. But I think every community has those people, those point people that know certain things that you want to know about tanning hides. You're going to go talk to so-and-so, and if you're heading down to this part of, the lake, talk to this guy, he'll know where the shoal is for you to set your net and so on. And so, but between male and female, you can see how that relationship transcends. And so for me as a little guy's experience, you're 6, 7 years old running around with a slingshot and hunting, you really take it seriously, eh? And we come with our bag, and then you have these little fried up breasts that the elderly woman would, and she'd be talking to you guys the whole time, and teaching you things. And so there's a good real life experience, folks.
That's interesting, Chris. Like it's you were learning hunting at a small scale, right? Like with everything was small, but the actual steps involved were all there, right?
It's doing it in a process. You got to make your slingshot, right? You got to make the slingshot. Learn how to do that, and then you learn how to shoot it, and learn how to. Then you got to learn how to track the flock, right? Yeah. Then you got to learn how to bring the bring the food, and it's you bring that to the elder, and you're talking like 30 or 40 like breasts that look like chicken nuggets almost, eh?
But then you're eating it too, right? It's the full cycle.
And you're sitting on that table. That's right, mm-hmm. Right? And so that was an experience that really made me understand that passing traditional information and traditional knowledge down from elders to the little guys that are and giving
that's a great sense story.
So thanks.
I did a short film piece for the Ontario Native Women's Association. It's a oral historical story of our great grandmother passing knowledge down to men in the video at a time when legally in British society. Women weren't allowed to sign contracts or chattel under law, right? Like go by their husbands. I actually have a video. I'll try to dig that up and show it because it's directly
Yeah,
applicable
yeah.
to what we're talking about, to knowledge passed down, and the importance of knowledge being passed down through not only women but through our lodge system. I'll see if I can bring that. It's pretty cool. We reenacted it, and it was weird. Me, Tony McGuire, teaching women like an old story because it was like I'm a bit of an idiot, right? But I actually I know my oral history, right? So I was able to teach
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
Whereas like when we showed it,
Just a
people were
smidge.
crying. People were
Yeah.
crying and stuff, and I was like, "Oh, this is great!" Like I was able to teach a new generation this story about my great grandmother, who I take really great pride in. My great great grandmother having signed a treaty before Canada that led to the existence of Canada, right? So it's pretty cool. I'll see if I can dig it
Yeah.
up.
If we can take a clip out of this show as well, too, I'd like to get that quote. I'm a bit of an idiot as well, just for my own purposes. Yeah, we'll work on that. Okay, let's play clip number 3, and then connect again.
During that time period, because during that time, the people they feared the government officials. They feared the ministry, the MNR, and they feared the police, especially the RCMP. And those are the things that really it took away. It forced us to hide our things, our spiritual knowledge, and to hide those things, and because we were told that was not the way of the new people. That was not the way. And that's why these things were hidden. That's why during that time period, I didn't learn those 7 teachings. I'd never heard of them.
Yeah, that's the truth. Yeah.
Yeah, it's it was really interesting, that fear of government officials, and I don't see, when I'm in communities, it's not necessarily fear I see, but severe mistrust of government,
Yeah.
in particular, right?
Well,
And
whenever the plane would come in,
Yeah, something was
whenever
leaving.
the
Yeah.
plane would come in, they would call it, the yellow bird is coming to either arrest someone or take
Yeah.
your kids, right?
Someone's leaving. Something's
And
leaving.
that's the sentiment.
yeah,
Yeah. Nothing's good's happening if that yellow bird's going to land on our community. So
We have,
so
we have
community
oral,
members were hiding, right? They're hiding their
Yeah.
culture.
well, we have
Absolutely.
oral history of them hiding. Like people would
physically
hide.
hiding.
People would hide their children. It wasn't just knowledge.
Yeah.
Because we have a unique experience in my family because look at me, I'm obviously not full Anishinaabe. That's not important in our culture, but it was important in protecting our knowledge because, like I said, the residential school took the Indians, and then the half-breeds were able to keep the knowledge alive. They weren't allowed to go to white schools because they were too brown. They weren't allowed to go to the residential school because they were too white. And what's kind of funny is later, my aunts would talk about the half-breeds later on, going like in the beginning they were fighting to get into the residential school, and then afterwards they're like, well, holy cow, I'm really glad I didn't get into the residential school, because the half breeds would go outside the residence. Well, we want to go where all the other kids are going, and they in a horrible way. Like I'm sorry, in my family
Yep.
we find humor in the darkest stuff, but that's how my aunts would relay this. They'd be like, we were laughing afterwards. That's a good thing you didn't get into that school. And that was the joke, was like, you're outside fighting to get into the school, but you would go back to the community and learn from your grandmothers. And so you would have these white Indians teaching dark Indians their culture, and it was very it's kind of very humorous, right? Like people would see it and they go, "Wow, that guy's got the deepest accent ever," because he grew up with Mama, but the kids come back with perfect English accents. Very confusing, and so the knowledge it was destroyed, but we were able to keep a lot. Some well, not to say a lot, but a lot of it alive through that very thing. But a lot of communities weren't that lucky. All the kids were taken, and there was no way to
Yeah,
protect them.
I can share something there on that exact point, Tony. And it's
Yeah,
funny, like funny. I'm not supposed to use
I
that
know, I
word
know.
for this type of dialogue here, but
Well,
um,
it's pretty harsh topic,
so
so
a lot of communities so had large families, eh? So
yeah,
I think my father's side had like 12 kids or something like that, or 10 or
yeah.
whatever,
We were
something, in
16,
that
yeah,
range. And so my father would have been one of the younger ones, right? So there's a lot of brothers and sisters older that didn't go to residential school, and so there was this transcendence of nutritional knowledge and helping your siblings learn more, because they were taken, and they didn't get to learn as much as they did on the land, but the siblings were taking out the younger ones that were taken away to residence school and making sure that they knew
yeah,
laws of the land
Yeah.
and so on. And so I think in every community you have bits and pieces of communities that survived and were able to maintain a lot of
they
that
were.
culture, and some that weren't. So it's
Mm.
there's no percentage, there's no number, that but it was all dependent on how the community was shaped, the dynamics of the community, how many kids didn't get taken, how many did, and so on. And so, but I have to, say that, in my experience, the folks that did go to residence school were able to learn from the elders, in their families and in the community that kept that culture alive.
Hmm.
Um,
Wow, interesting. Let's now move to our final clip, and we'll connect again after that.
What I learned was the family values of of our home, and what the male and the female should do in terms of relationship of the land, the animals. There's a lot of things. I don't think when you speak about the laws that we're talking about, Anishinaabe people, or the spiritual people. So when you break down we weren't, we also begin to stick with our identity as the Ojibwe people and as Cree people, or Cree Ojibwe people. I never heard about that. I never heard about those things of our identity as Ojibwe people. And I think those came from the dictionary and early education, and what have become as our identity was mixed in the ways of the newcomers and their language and how they identified us.
yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot there. It's remarkable just how how much the identity was taken away, right, from
yeah.
community members, and and it's a slow climb, isn't it, guys? To reestablish and redefine that identity, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, some communities, are making better strides than others. But one of the things that I heard Gordon say, some of the identity, some of the roles and stuff like that people had. One of the things that I thought was interesting, was there's always in some of the communities I've dealt with, there's always some of these females, you know, these women that have to take on different roles to do, like, you know, have to take on a man's role, right, to go hunting and then do her role in the skinning and so on, because whether, you know, didn't have a father or didn't have a husband or whatever the case may be. And those are always prominent women. There's a one by the name of Maggie Buffalo, very prominent woman that had to actually feed 3 families on her own because the husbands went away on the trap line and they didn't come back. And so being able to transcend into another role and manage that and do both, you know, they kept that alive. And then what did she do? She taught her sons and her grandsons on how to do that male role, because she was the only person that had that knowledge. And so she kept both male and female identities and performed, you know, the activities of both and taught both roles. And so that's another testament to, you know, survival of culture and the importance of those strong women. You know, those women were, you know, almost the center of the circle. You know, we know the center of the circle is you know, the children, and what's next is you know, the women next to that circle, the grandmothers. Then there's, you know, the grandfathers. Then on the outside of the circle was the men. So as long as you know, those inner circles, you know, children and mothers and grandmothers were the center of that circle, that knowledge was going to be passed on. And so women hold a really strong role with, you know, maintaining that culture in the absence of, you know, men. So
I think
Great point, Chris.
I think also, and Gordon is saying this kind of multiple times, because I never grew up in that, or I never heard that tradition. And with residential schools and kids in the 70s and getting the right to vote, getting back into culture, what with whites, like entering, because we were locked on reses, right? You weren't allowed to go to the cities till the late 60s, 70s, and so you had this these natives searching for who they were, and so certain tribes had hid in the mountains, like the North Dakotan peoples, the Potawatomi, and so that's where the progenitor 7 teachings come from. I think, based on what I've talked to elders, probably he wouldn't have heard of that because that wouldn't have existed there. I know in our territory probably that wasn't there, but I was talking to a Cree gentleman, and he was doing Ojibwe culture, and he was teaching people, and it was an older gentleman, and I confronted him. I said, "Hey, you said you're Cree, but you're doing Ojibwe stuff." I said, "I don't understand, because you're saying that's Cree culture," and he goes, "Well, I'm just trying, man. I don't know my culture." And then he started crying, and I hugged him, and I said, "Oh," and so and then he says, "Look this is where our culture is. I'm an old man. I'm going to leave the world soon, and I just learned something from you." And he didn't mean it like insulting, like, "I just learned something from you," but he was like, "I learned something from you. Like, I didn't know that." And he's like, and so I get where Gordon's coming from, because he's not saying insulting, like, "I never heard of that." We're piecing together our culture with pieces, and so we're getting a more homogenous culture that may not be just Anishinaabe anymore. It might not just be Cree. We do have defining lines, but I think in those 4 clips you see him dealing with that. I think you see him going, I've never really heard of this. Like, this seems new, and especially in the last clip where he said this feels like dictionary based. But it's because our people are getting educated, we're becoming lawyers, we're able to fight back now. But we're also going back to primary sources, and we're learning about our culture through germal ethno-historians of the 1800s, and we're kind of like, we're doing our best.
I think there's a gap there. I think there's a gap
right?
In like the age. So someone of like Gordon's age, the age group, right?
Yeah.
Where, you know, residential school is still impacting, and some of that, you know, traditional laws maybe haven't been shared as strongly, and so now we call it cultural revival, if you will. So younger people younger people now know more than maybe some of the folks that are
So
a bit
the older
older
people,
because they weren't taught that. Right? So I think there is that generational gap when it comes to that stuff, and so you have the elders that know it, and I think there's a spot there where. And no fault of those folks, but like there wasn't the funding, there wasn't other things that like a movement, sharing of information between between communities, and having that ability to share from your neighbors and so on. It is definitely on the incline, right?
yeah.
Yeah, it's a long process, slow process though, isn't it? It's
Well, it takes more
generations,
than
isn't
100
it?
years to try and change a culture, right?
Yeah.
And
No,
that's
it's
Yeah,
gonna be a
and
while.
that's something that I heard
yeah,
before. Like how long is it going to take them to get their act together and
yeah,
assimilate or whatever else? But no, I think it shows the strength of the culture to say no, we want to go in that direction, right?
Um,
We want
yeah,
to have our act together, and so but on our terms and with our laws, and
I'm
yes,
that's
telling
something
you.
that you can see it happening with our project here,
yep,
and the way that we incorporate that stuff into the development, the design, the management, right?
hmm
Incorporating that into a project like this, a First Nation led project, is something that I think we can take our hats off to the communities of Webequie and Martin Falls.
Anders,
I totally agree.
Anders, keeping the camera on me for a second. I just want to make one more point. We may be going back to the culture, but I'm taking bologna and can click with me. That's all I have to say.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
Well, on that note,
Yeah.
on
Why
that
they have the
note,
lesson on?
Part of Anishinaabe culture is also leaving on a good note, so I wanted to have a little
I
laugh
like
at the
that.
end.
Well said, Tony. Well, gentlemen, that was a
Good
great
job.
conversation. Fantastic, and that
Thanks
wraps
for
up
having me.
our first discussion of community perspectives. We've got many more to come. We hope it was helpful and encourages you to join us again. Don't forget to keep in touch with our project team members via the contact information available on our website, northernroadlink.ca. Miigwech, and make sure to look out for project updates on social media and our website. Miigwech, and see you soon.